minions, welcome to Crank It Up. I'm Jim Price, and today I want to give some advice on making custom factions. Inserting yourself into a variable player powers game is half the fun of that mechanic, as I am always drawn to what other possibilities exist. With Smash Up, it's natural to want to create your own faction, especially since there are infinite theme possibilities, and there are more custom factions floating around than published ones. I've been able to consult on a number of them, and people will often ask me for feedback on theirs. I'm not doing that much anymore for reasons that will make sense on Monday, but I do read a number of custom factions that people post, even if I don't comment. Having been in the position to not only design custom factions and playtest published factions, but also create my own game system, I wanted to take some time to offer some lessons learned in order to help people trying to maximize their enjoyment in this activity. Of course, everything I'm going to say is my opinion, and my design principles are my own, which have their biases. I also think that there is no single path to success, but there are in fact mistakes to avoid. At no point is this video intended to come across as judgmental, conceited, or anything other than truly being helpful, so let's get that out of the way. The first advice I'd offer is relevant before you even start, and that's to be honest with yourself about your goals and what you are trying to accomplish. Is this just for fun? What will you be doing with this faction? The simple truth is that most custom factions are either overpowered or broken. We've all been there. Part of the custom faction process is separating the idea from the execution. Designing custom factions gives you infinite freedom, but freedom can get you carried away. Sometimes I'll provide feedback to someone, and they'll say, well, I don't think it's too strong, or they'll claim that they've tested it. To produce a 4-faction expansion, it takes months of testing of dozens of players participating over several revisions, with extended discussion and statistical analysis mixed in. And you can make a legitimate argument that it's still not right, or things slip in that should not. But yours is balanced? That is not meant to be harsh, but to reflect reality. When it's our product, it's harder to be objective. Think of it this way. If you are capable of testing a custom faction within a small group, then what's the point of having a playtesting team? Couldn't we all just do the same? It's important to be honest about what you are doing and be receptive to feedback, and I need to stress, we've all been there. Sometimes people think that quantity of custom factions is indicative of quality. In fact, it's often the opposite. I was a newspaper writer in college, and one time someone told me, and I quote, "You write a lot of articles." It wasn't a compliment like I thought it was. What he was saying was that I was able to write so much because I wasn't taking the time to write as well as I should. In some respects, my rapid turnaround was solidifying bad habits. While success can breed a higher quantity of factions, so can failure, and we have to be cognizant of that. Because of the tendency to get caught up in powerful cards, I would strongly recommend not actually starting with cards and instead focusing on a sales pitch. Cards are part of the execution. A sales pitch is the idea. I will often write a summary of what the faction wants to do before I write a single card. This is my developer background talking, but we don't just start coding immediately. There's a design process which starts with high-level concepts. When you create a card, you are already putting limitations on the idea. It's either a minion or an action. If it's a minion, it has X power. It also puts a singular focus on what should be a global objective. If I can't write a 3-sentence summary of the cards, how can I be expected to write a 20-card deck? What is the guideline that is tying them together? It's critical to have this high-level summary because you can reference it as you start to write cards. If your card doesn't align with the summary, then it doesn't belong in your faction. If it doesn't belong in your faction, it hurts internal synergy, and everything goes downhill from there. And if you decide you want to change something about the faction, like a specific card, you have something to reference. The next piece of advice would be to create a thumbnail card. If I were making a video about your faction, what card would I put on the thumbnail? If it's an action, is it a candidate for action awareness? You need a card that conveys most, if not all, of your summary in a single card. It should at least feature the payoff, the core of the faction. A great example of a thumbnail card is from Blackjack's Celtics. When I saw the Banshee, I immediately knew where this faction was going. It acts as a great representative of the faction as a whole, encapsulated in a single card. I had the same experience with Major's Gamblers. When you see one card, you instantly predict another. If I'm selling you on Mega Troopers, I'm not using its blitzing time, I'm not using Red Trooper, I'm using Black Trooper. It instantly conveys the idea of having a lot of specials. And when you identify that type of ability that realizes your vision from the faction, everything can be built around that. You don't have to decide minion or action at this time. This is about a first pass implementation and refining the summary into actionable visual cards. Next, I highly recommend that you stick to the slotting system, especially for your first few factions. It is incredibly harder to balance a faction that doesn't stick to the standard formula, because without it, your cards aren't playing any roles. Now, this is something that is specifically my philosophy, but I find it to be incredibly important because repeatability drives consistency. If you have different abilities spread out through the faction, your results will be based on what you draw. Also, without roles to play, who is meant to be the lowest impactful minion? Without a clear guideline, everyone starts skewing to the right, and you end up with overpowered factions as a result. I see a lot of factions with unique minions. Even with the slotting system, that's still problematic. Instead of focusing on many great ideas, focus on a few good ones. A standard faction has 12 unique designs, and that's a massive difference from 20. As you are creating cards, lean further into the slotting system by establishing actual roles for these cards. Once I started publicly complaining about factions having too many terminal actions, you'd be amazed at how many other people realized that they were experiencing the same frustrations without ever knowing it. If you remember the caste system, having a good balance of actions drives the fun of a faction. If every card in your deck is antagonistic, that faction, with its best partner, will be unbearable. If every card is terminal, it will be unplayable. I've actually found great success in writing out the categories, such as antagonistic card 1 and payoff card 2, so that I have an outline for implementation. I don't know what the cards will do specifically, but I know what they will be doing generally. It helps keep me focused on making sure that I don't have too much of one type to play, and therefore can handle the randomness of the draw. Then you can start implementing your cards according to that outline. As I mentioned before, freedom can be a bad thing, but so can being clever. A lot of times I will come across an ability that seems cool or clever, but is in fact severely broken. A great way to test this is by conducting the first turn test. For each card, what does the best possible first turn look like, and what is the outcome of that? Under no circumstance should a base be able to break on the first turn of the game, before anyone has a chance to even play there. And I've seen cards that do this way too many times. I've even seen an auto win possible on the first turn. But usually, it's an easy 4 to 5 VP before the other players have taken a turn, and that's just insane. If your cards are capable of that, your cards definitely have a problem. Without going into specifics, someone once created a card that was a first turn, 2 card, any minion 6 VP if the right base was out, and this card was a double feature. But we've also successfully fought off these cards in published factions, which shows you that this tendency really does happen to everyone. So test each of your cards to see what does the best case scenario look like, because synergy often creates that best case scenario, and it may be too strong. As you are considering abilities, it's important to know how to buff and nerf cards, and what your options are. For example, if you are recurring a card, going into play is incredibly strong. Going to the hand is weaker, but still strong. If hand is too strong, you can go to the top of your deck, then shuffling in, then placing on the bottom, but there are other levers as well. You have randomness as an option. You can include a cost or a condition. Sometimes it's best to write cards in a language of generics. If you're going to draw cards, draw end cards. Don't let the number distract you from the role in the faction. The number is about balance, but the generic ability of drawing cards is the purpose, and purpose matters most at this stage. If a faction gets recurrence, the fact that it has recurrence matters, and you can decide on the specific number later. In fact, as you start assigning numbers and locations, you start running into issues with power creeping other cards. I've seen terminal actions that grant a flat 5 power. I've seen a summon mixed in with a time loop. I've seen ninja masters outside of a king minion. If balance is an equation, starting naturally higher than someone else leads to either internal imbalance or OP status, neither of which are good. I'm personally a fan of objective-based cards where the payoff scales based on how much you accomplish the focused goal. For all the hate I give Polynesian Voyagers, Unity of the Tribes is that type of card. When you have a card that provides a flat benefit, It's easy to make a card that is weaker or better than that, and it usually ends up just being better. As you are finalizing your design, consider the implications with known problematic factions or bases. If anyone is likely to break your cards, it's them. Known offenders would include aliens, zombies, and robots, with bases like the Homeworld and the 2 VP scoring bases from the core set. Be wary of inadvertently duplicating a Leprechaun-like ability or Ice Castle. I've seen some custom factions create scenarios where there is no legal play in a 2-player game, which should never happen. If an obvious, egregious problem presents itself fairly quickly, that's generally a sign that not much thought was put into this faction. While there are always going to be things that come up, many of these problems should be caught early. My final piece of advice is perhaps the most important, and that is to make your design a reflection of yourself and your playstyle. No one will be as invested in your custom faction as you, and passion bleeds through. Passion derives quality. Chucky's Cookie hates elves, and I wouldn't expect him to try to make a faction like that, nor would I expect Toby to make a nice faction, because he's drawn to antagonism. Of course, passion and self-reflection don't create balance, but I find that if you stick to what you know and play, you'll write better high-level summaries, which will drive better cards. I don't do well with basic or simple. It's not fun for me. So if I tried to design that way, I'd drive myself crazy. It's also easier to be confident in a design that is a reflection of yourself. If you'll permit me one story, those of you who have followed Arudia's progress will know that there are cards that you can draft into your deck every game. One such card, the Cloak of Dullahan, has been my favorite since the beginning, but no one else is taking it. While I don't expect you to understand what this card does, it is 100% me, and I've never considered changing it. Some of those neutral cards didn't pan out and were removed, but this card stayed because it sums me up perfectly, and over time people began to see its value. I want to create cards that intrinsically feel like bandit cards, and if I have confidence in myself, it can weather through the disappointment of others. Now, its draft rate is perfect, as people have realized what this card wants to do. When you design a faction, it should feel like a faction you personally designed. It should feel yours. You may not agree with all these points, and you may have your own process, but I do hope this is able to help some of you. What are your tips for making custom factions? Let us know in the comments. Next week, we have an exciting week of videos for you. On Monday, I'll talk about the initiatives we are taking to get custom content published in Arudia. So if you wish your ideas were published in SmashUp, which regrettably is unlikely to happen, come hear how, and more importantly why, I want that to become a reality in my game. We have an epic game between Eric and I on Wednesday, as well as the annual airing of SmashUp Grievances that day as well. Then, I have a special Christmas SmashUp surprise planned for Friday, which you won't want to miss. 2 games, 2 videos per game, perfectly balanced as all things should be. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Let's shut it down.